Hi guys, this video is about gang stalking, aka security services stalking, COINTELPRO, torture, terror, murder, hybrid warfare, mind control, and cults. The dirty war and cognitive warfare waged against targeted individuals, TIs, by NATO and the National Security Racketeering Network, aka Murder Inc., Department of Defense, the DoD, the NSA, the CIA, FBI, DHS, JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, their foreign and corporate sponsors and private sector cutouts, law enforcement and Department of Justice, organized crime, loads of civilian military death squads comprised of computer network operators, cyberstalkers, spies, surveillance role players, gang stalking perps, and the corrupt scientific, academic, medical establishment. This totalitarian New World Order military intelligence police state system, here named Global Government Gang Stalking Genocide Gestapo Gulag, G6, nice name, is an expanding for-profit business that uses undercover civilian military death squads to wage continuous, covert, psychotronic, psychological and electronic, neuro, political, and information, i.e. hybrid, warfare against innocent, targeted civilians under the pretext of national security, human research, weapons testing, counterterrorism, and cognitive warfare. This is from ex-NSA whistleblower William Binney. The NSA traded the security of the people of the United States and the free world and our allies around the world for money. Here's a funny little thing you can say to gang stalkers. It says, "Daddy, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a gang stalker, honey. We torture Americans electronically in hopes they'll commit suicide." Yeah, put that on their car windshield. Okay, this is from Ted Gunderson. Gang stalking is actually a self-harm term for a government no-touch torture program. Gang stalking / electronic torture is a very cleverly disguised program of torture and murder. In a January 2007 issue of the Washington Post, Dr. Colonel John B. Alexander said that non-lethal weapons should be used electronically neuter people. In his article, New Weapons for a New World Order, he wrote, "The United States must be able to protect national interests and values even in ambiguous circumstances." According to former intelligence officer Julianne McKinney's 1992 report, the pattern of directed energy attacks and gang stalking is the same all over the world. This program is being used to silently neutralize all people that the New World Order believes will be troublesome to their rule. In particular, this includes intelligent, independent, free-thinking, incorruptible nonconformists. The control mechanisms in the Soviet Union, which included the targeting of the civilian population, was only made possible by the citizens who stalked and harassed people in public. The KGB's success, added McKinney, depended on the extensive use of informant networks and agent provocateurs. McKinney stated, "I think that once full control is established over a major percentage of the population, and enough of the population is silent and unwilling to stick their necks out, that we inevitably would be heading toward a Holocaust." So they want to mass murder people. This is from Karen Melton Stewart. She's an ex-NSA whistleblower and targeted individual. "I used to work for the National Security Agency, the NSA. Post 9/11, laws are being purposefully misinterpreted to say that since we, the USA, reserve the right to kill terrorists anywhere and any time, that if we lower the criteria to less than probable cause in regard to the terrorist watch list, which was done in 2013, then thousands of random people can be put on the terrorist watch list, no questions asked. The Department of Homeland Security has made a separate, for-profit DHS entity, the National Fusion Center Association, and is selling kill contracts on innocent people to buddies in the military-industrial complex to torture and kill, to test on human weapons like gases, poisons, directed energy weapons, nanoparticles, secretive medical chips, and even networks of chips that, according to the Pentagon, come in torture protocol 1 through 5 at least. Another protocol being used is to order law enforcement to write off anybody who complains of stalking harassment and being tortured as crazy, and they are forbidden to help the person denied constitutional rights. Infraguard vigilantes under the auspices of the FBI and the fusion centers are paid to stalk and harass the victims so that the harassment mimics what one-dimensional psychologists immediately assume is schizophrenia, delusions, paranoia, when it is not. This constant harassment was perfected by the former East German Communist Secret Police, the Stasi, as psychological warfare to destroy dissidents. Since there are millions of dollars to be made using non-consensual human experimentation, even to lethality, this program is viciously covered up with an intricate network of paid conspirators. Craig Tuck, the New Zealand international human rights lawyer, the lawyer for Susie Dawson, politician, activist, journalist, and TI. Activists all over the world are being targeted by the intelligence services for their activities. For their work in challenging the status quo, they are being made to pay a high price. These are ordinary civilians, our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, and friends. Untrained and non-military, they are being targeted by the most advanced military machine this planet has ever seen. Susie Dawson lifts the lid on the human cost of speaking truth to power. Susie's a journalist and activist from New Zealand. Her work shone a bright light on the abuses of intelligence services. They aggressively targeted her in retribution for it. She has been living in exile for more than 3 years. Almost everything we are talking about comes under the umbrella of counterterrorism, but they expand their definition of counterterrorism to mean any threat to national security. Then they expand what a threat to national security is to include threats to critical infrastructure, which includes private corporations, banks, credit card companies, etc. So if you are a threat to critical infrastructure, like a bank, you become a threat to national security. Then all the apparatus of the state is used to target you. Government departments justify spying on their own citizens as being part of risk management. We've seen the invoices of governments hiring private intelligence agencies to spy on the threats, aka targets, on the ground. This is put on the general ledger as a security expense. Hence, the targeting of civilians or citizens around the world who oppose some government policy or activity. We are being deemed a risk either to the government or to the police and security state, or to corporate entities. And then these military fusion centers are trading in our data and pushing them up through the military networks. The domestic police intelligence units and the government departments and corporate entities don't like to do dirty work themselves, so they hire private intelligence and private security contractors, and those contractors are the ones that hire teams of people that go and stalk, target, interfere with, sabotage, and destroy the lives of whoever is deemed to be a risk to the state. They are literally billing the government. So the government is identifying who should be targeted, and then these are the goons that are actually doing it. The privatization of surveillance means they must have perpetual growth and expand the number of targeted individuals. As more and more people are being targeted, there will be greater and greater awareness that this is happening. If we don't stop this, eventually it will be standard operating procedure that everybody is targeted. The expanding watch lists are a kind of Ponzi scheme. And this is from Elizabeth Mueller, activist and TI from Virginia. It's mind-boggling how many people are involved in targeting one person. It's quite terrifying, actually. It's like a full-scale military operation. There is somebody directing these operations. They can be psychological operations. It can be smearing people, stalking their mail, and physically breaking in. They want to be always learning more and more about you. It's called the collect. They want to collect information about how to control you. They disseminate the information back to the team, and they keep running missions. It can be constant. Targets will have people doing these ops against them all day long. If they break into your house, they report back. How many people have they employed to do this useless work? Is half the country paid to spy on the other half? From Camille Piona. 5 components of CIA/military operations, information operations, comprise the protocol of the present gangstalking of millions of American whistleblowers, dissidents, and other civilians. It's happening all over the world. I'm Canadian, it's happening to me. So it happens in Canada as well. These are: number 1, PSYOPs, psychological operations. Number 2, MILDEC, military deception. Number 3, OPSEC, operation security. Number 4, CNO, computer network operations. And number 5, EW, electronic warfare. That's when they zap you and torture you with frequencies. Regarding PSYOPs, psychological operations accomplishes this by strategically conveying selected information about the targeted enemy to a target audience to motivate the target audience to behave in a certain way toward the enemy. Of the 3 different types of PSYOPs, white, gray, and black operations are the ones being perpetrated on the targeted civilians deemed enemies of the state, the aim of which is to break up every relationship by getting everyone to fear and despise the enemy, thus systematically isolating the victim and removing all support. The MO used to accomplish this is the disclosure of sensitive material about the enemy that contains a credible threat attributed to a private party. Ostensibly, it is being disclosed to warn the target audience for their protection. In reality, the sensitive disclosure has been specifically crafted to foment disaffection, discontent, and opposition within the enemy's own circles, deconditioning any previous experience of the enemy as a pleasant person of sound mind, and conditioning a new perception of the enemy as severely disturbed, repulsive, and noxious. The target audience, having been made to fear and despise the enemy, is further persuaded to distance themselves from the enemy. The source and the originator of the operation, the U.S. government, must deny their involvement and be perceived as a disinterested, benevolent party merely passing on reports of danger obtained from private individuals. Prior to the operation, the black operatives extensively profile and assess the attitudes and vulnerabilities of their target audience and tailor the most effective approach. The lies crafted prey upon the specific fears of each target audience, depending on what the operatives would determine these specific fears to be. In every case, the enemy is portrayed as mentally ill and unstable, as vengeful and posing a serious threat toward the person whom they have ostensibly come by to warn. Another name of PSYOP is MISO, Military Information Support Operations. They accomplish their persuade, influence, change strategy by concocting vilifying lies and weaving them skillfully into real, factual, and biographical information, fabricating evidence by taking words and actions out of context, using spliced together audio, video, and confidential documents, and accentuating any sins they've been able to dig up. It all gets edited together in a defamatory manner designed to be as damaging as possible. The finished product then being used to break up all of the victim's relationships toward the goal of isolating the victim and removing all support. And the people who do this are Freemasons. Black operatives are, by definition, professional liars. Their job is to tailor lies to achieve a covert goal. Thus, to an employer, they might portray the victim as a thief. To a new boyfriend, they might portray the victim as a prostitute with untreated venereal disease. Around children, they might portray the victim as a pedophile. As you can imagine, such tactics very effectively prompt the targeted audience to cast the victim out of their lives. 2 characterizations are always given. The targeted individual is portrayed as both criminally minded and as having a history of serious mental illness. You can always tell a black operation by this dual portrayal, along with the need to disclose sensitive, confidential information about the target individual to all of his or her relationships. The nefarious art paints a credible picture of extraordinary severity that can be made of anyone. It is then presented to the victim's employer, landlord, doctor, lawyer, pastor, family members, everyone in the victim's life, each getting a tailored warning of a serious threat that the victim poses to them. The target audience has their perception radically changed as a result of the diabolically skillful presentation. It achieves its covert aim, to get everyone in the victim's life to fear and despise the victim, and to get everyone to cast the victim out of their lives. This eventually renders the targeted individual friendless, jobless, homeless, penniless, isolated, and indignant, soon forgotten by the friends and family who have cast them out, and shunned everywhere they turn for help. Only then can the final phase begin. The targeted individuals are disappeared in the middle of the night, either executed in cold blood or accused of a spectacular crime and taken captive to a prison or psychiatric hospital. Now, this is from Jeffrey Mador, electronics and radio communications expert, and he's a targeted individual. This electronic technology, the equipment they are using on him, is manufactured by a company called Tetra Systems. You point it at a person, it receives their brainwaves and converts those into visual and audible information, speech, subconscious thought processes, etc. It's just very invasive. It can also be used to put subliminal suggestions on a person's mind. It can alter mood and all kinds of things. So someone who is very talented with this equipment can query another person with it, and that person won't know they are being queried. And they'll start thinking through whatever topic they were directed into thinking about, and information can be gathered very quickly. With this equipment, you can direct them to talk about any subject, and they won't know they're being directed. And so very quickly, a lot of information can be gathered for the purpose of blackmail and beyond. So this equipment, I am suspecting, is being used for espionage. I would like to see these non-lethal electronic weapons classified as weapons. I don't think you can violate a person more than to violate their very central nervous system, their very mind, to steal what's there, and to place something there artificially, attempting to control, and ultimately bringing on torment and torture that leads to death. I don't think you can commit a worse crime against a human than human research. Now, this is from Amy Holum, U.S. military police veteran, digital forensics investigator, and a target individual. 4G and 5G and electronic magnetic weapons systems have been used since 1932. So it's been over 80 years that they have been developing these technologies. I have helped over 3,500 victims worldwide, over 2,500 within the U.S., and over 1,200 in other countries. The Department of Defense and the FBI have a list of people who have been chipped and implanted. A lot of those lists go down to using the DHS fusion centers to local police officers to target and harass them, the targeted individuals, and to use these different types of technologies. Most of them are deployed through their drones, planes, or satellite systems that are actually connected to air-to-air missile defense systems for air-to-surface, air-to-ground, ground-to-ground vehicles that are used to attack the victims on a daily basis. You don't have to be chipped or implanted to be attacked by these frequencies. In fact, our own bodies produce frequencies, so technically they can zone in on those personal frequencies and hit you with those radio waves. A lot of this is being done through sub-carrier waves and AM and FM radio broadcasting systems. Your cell towers, radio towers, are all used to attack you. They are basically using US Northcom systems along with NATO, and they are selling the links to the child human sex trafficking rings using third-party contractors. So they can gain access to these links to the satellite systems, and they use a catalog system of the victims, and they pick and choose the victims that they either want to child human sex traffic, rape, torture to get off, and they are using cryptocurrency and a bunch of other different methods to attack the victims. I have audio evidence When I do the audio analysis of the victims, I capture communications within their videos and audios that they send me to analyze. So I capture all the radio frequencies and telecommunications of these criminal network systems. This is from Brian Kofron, former security specialist, whistleblower, and TI. Amazon.com was/is collecting DNA samples from employees and others and storing them with the DNA database of millions of Americans. The main way they are now researching and developing the voice-to-skull/hive mind frequency weapons for emotional manipulation and behavior modification is to tune directly into the resonant frequency of the DNA of the target that they're using the technology against them. I was assigned to an IDF Israeli Defense Forces facility that stores the servers that the DNA databases are stored on. Working with the people who were experimenting on the SIS employees and the homeless population in Seattle, I learned that what was stored on those servers was the DNA profiles of the people that were being tortured and abused, experimented upon by this technology, and that the way that the technology worked was to actually tap into the resonant frequency of the DNA itself. One of the uses of Amazon's DNA databases was to fine-tune this technology on each individual to provide total biohacking capabilities of an individual. In my job at Security Industry Specialist in Seattle, Washington, I was involved in the monitoring of the test subjects, targeted individuals. Unfortunately, the test subjects are under the influence of this technology, so they literally cannot get away and cannot do anything that they are not permitted to do by the technology. It's very, very scary, the amount of control that the program has over the test subjects. They are very much slaves with very little autonomy. Free will is taken almost completely away from them. I was human intelligence. Oftentimes, I was undercover in plain clothes. I now suspect, of course, that I too might have been under the influence of this technology while I was working there. That they may have actually been looking through my eyes and hearing through my ears too when I was on assignment. There are no physical symptoms, so I cannot confirm this. But this is exactly what this technology is used for. It is used to look through eyes and ears so that basically every walking human being in the city of Seattle is a walking, talking camera and a walking, talking audio microphone that can be seen through and heard through. This is not just a program that is run by Amazon and SIS. The federal government is involved. We're talking about the entire city of Seattle. I became aware of the scale of the program and the point of it, which was ultimately to research and develop this technology so that it could be used against, number one, other TIs across the country, and primarily, number two, for highly classified military and intelligence applications. It is the testing on live human test subjects that is beyond any ability to comprehend or tolerate. The fact it is so widespread, it is being done to people against their will and without their knowledge. It's outrageous and it needs to be stopped. This is from Catherine Austin Fitz, former assistant to HUD, and she says she's a TI for 12 years. Just so you know, guys, some people are fake TIs. They actually work for the state, and they pose as TIs, so use your own discretion. What we are experiencing is a coup. The current secret central governance system is harvesting this planet for enormous amounts of resources. The central banking warfare system controls everything through people, one by one, person by person. Unbeknownst to most of us, we have a covert social credit system with three primary lines of control. Number one, financial carrots and sticks. Number two, surveillance and mind control. Number three, covert ops, including covert physical intervention. The control system is phenomenally wasteful. They have artificial intelligence and software. The more money the taxpayer pays for this system to operate, the more money Mr. Global makes. So there is no amount of money they won't spend on the control grid. Since the mid-1990s, we're looking at a long-term poisoning of the population. The injections have poisoned millions of people. It says, during my litigation against the government, I was poisoned 8 times. This is a much more common covert tactic than I realized. We're talking about a global network of infrastructure where if somebody's not doing what they're told, they can be literally poisoned. When this enemy of the state thing started for me, it was just wild. People are breaking into your house. They are leaving dead rats on the doorstep. You're being followed in the car, and when you are walking, they are approaching and threatening your family. It's wild, just like the movie Enemy of the State. I tried to hire 3 different private intelligence companies to help me with security, and they would say no, it's too dangerous. But one of them, a biological warfare expert, did tell me that they are going to drill holes in my walls and introduce biological warfare, and so I should buy some birds to use as canaries in the coal mine. Then a process started where I would literally have a flu or cold all the time. Whenever it started to get better, bam, it started again. It felt very junky and synthetic. It didn't feel natural. Then I noticed that holes had been drilled in the wall, and the birds were dying, so I sold my house and moved. I thought it would be so much cheaper to just kill me. I estimated by the time it was over that they spent $45 million torturing me and trying to make me weak or frail. I finally realized it's a huge business. Taxpayers pay for people to be surveilled, harassed, litigated against, and they can make a lot more money keeping me alive than just killing me. They needed me to look like I failed. So weakening somebody is infinitely better than killing them. I think a lot of this biological warfare, including low-grade biological warfare and the non-lethal weaponry, all of this stuff is designed to target and weaken your enemy, but not kill your enemy. This system predates the signing of the U.S. Constitutional Convention. And now it seems the American people are the enemy. Okay, in October 1995, the national budget deal busted, and 2 things happened the next month. The predatory lending started with an uproar, and the FDA approved highly addictive opioid Oxycontin, and the predatory lending in the pill mills hit and targeted the same neighborhoods. Here's the thing. If you can't get a financially responsible deal on the budget, you have only one other way of balancing the budget, and that's to bring down life expectancy. Now, this is from Dr. Eric T. Kallstrom, Emeritus Professor of Geography and Target Individual. The covert, extra-legal targeting, gangstalking, electronic torture, and use of innocent American civilians in non-consensual biomedical experiments comprise high treason under the 14th Amendment, violate innumerable international, federal, state, and local laws and treaties, and constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Perpetrators and collaborators at all levels of the program should be exposed as the most despicable criminals, cowards, and bullies in history and brought to justice post haste. There is no statute of limitations for the crime of torture, and violations of some pertinent laws carries the death penalty. But what can extra-legally targeted citizens do when police, military, intelligence personnel, and the legal system, indeed, the very people we pay to protect and defend us, participate in and profit from our torture and terrorization? We may legitimately speculate that the special procedure of MK Delta combined with occult operation often forms part of the basis for global gang-stalking / electronic torture operations. Dr. Alfred McCoy. A question of torture. CIA interrogation from the Cold War. Okay. The history of CIA torture runs parallel to CIA neuroscience-based mind control research and also CIA non-lethal weapons research. This is important because mind control allegations by victims / target individuals include descriptions of techniques that sound like all 3 CIA programs. It is possible that the related Cold War CIA no-touch torture, non-lethal weapons, and neuroscience-based mind control programs have commingled for intelligence uses. Through covert trial and error, the CIA, in combination with university researchers, slowly identified 3 key behavioral components integral to its emerging techniques for psychological torture. Discovery number 1, sensory deprivation. In the early 1950s, Dr. Donald Hebb, McGill University, found that he could induce a state akin to psychosis in just 48 hours after just 2 to 3 days of such isolation, sitting in a cubicle with goggles, gloves, and earmuffs on. The subject's very identity had begun to disintegrate. Discovery number 2, self-inflicted pain. During the 1950s as well, 2 eminent neurologists at Cornell Medical Center working for the CIA found that the KGB's most devastating torture technique involved not crude physical beatings, but simply forcing the victim to stand for days at a time while the legs swelled, the skin erupted in suppurating lesions, the kidneys shut down, hallucinations began. Discovery 3. Anyone can torture. Finally, a young Yale psychologist, Stanley Milgram, conducted his famed obedience to authority experiments, asking ordinary New Haven citizens to torture on command, and discovered that, in contravention of conventional wisdom, anyone could be trained to torture. Milgram did controversial research under a government grant showing that almost any individual is capable of torture. A critical finding for the agency as it prepared to disseminate its method worldwide. By the project's end in the late 1960s, the torture research had involved 3 of the 100 most eminent psychologists of the 20th century, Hebb, Milgram, and Janis, as well as several presidents of the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association. That notorious photo of a hooded Iraqi on a box, arms extended, wires to his hands, exposes this covert method. The hood is for sensory deprivation, and the arms are extended for self-inflicted pain. Although seemingly less brutal than physical methods, no-touch torture leaves deep psychological scars on both victims and interrogators. One British journalist who observed this method use in Northern Ireland called sensory deprivation the worst form of torture, because it provokes more anxiety among the interrogatees than more traditional tortures, leaves no visible scars, and therefore is harder to prove and produces longer-lasting effects. McCoy explained how CIA no-touch torture changes its victim. Insights from the treatment of Chilean victims tortured under General Augusto Pinochet's regime offer a point of entry into this complex question. Psychotherapist Otto Dor-Zegers found that victims suffer a mistrust bordering on paranoia and a loss of interest that greatly surpasses anything observed in anxiety disorders. The subject does not only react to torture with a tiredness of days, weeks, or months, but remains a tired human being, relatively uninterested and unable to concentrate. These findings led him to a revealing question. What in torture makes possible a change of such nature that appears similar to psychotic processes into disorders of organic origin? Otto Dor-Zegers explained that techniques of torture work by creating deception, distrust, fear, disorientation, a kind of total theater that leaves the victim disoriented and emotionally and psychologically damaged. The similarity of the explanation below to street theater found in mind control allegations is remarkable. As Dor-Zegers describes it, the psychological component of torture becomes a kind of total theater, a constructed unreality of lies and inversion, and a plot that ends inexorably with the victim's self-betrayal and destruction. To make their artifice of false charges, fabricated news, and mock executions convincing, interrogators often become inspired thespians. The torture chamber itself thus has the theatricality of a set with special lighting, sound effects, props, and backdrop, all designed with a perverse stagecraft to evoke an aura of fear. Both stage and cell construct their own kind of temporality, while the play both expands and collapses time to carry the audience forward toward denouncement. The prison distorts time to disorient and then entrap the victim. As the torturer manipulates circumstances to maximize confusion, the victim feels prior schemas of the self and the world shattered and becomes receptive to the torturer's construction of reality. Under the peculiar conditions of psychological torture, victims, isolated from others, form emotional ties to their tormentors that make them responsive to a perverse play in which they are both audience and actor, subject and object, in a script that often leaves them not just disoriented, but emotionally and psychologically damaged, in some cases for the rest of their lives. On Monday, September 17, 2001, President Bush issued a 14-page top-secretive directive to DCIA, Tenet in the CIA, ordering the agency to hunt, capture, imprison, and interrogate suspects around the world. It set new limits on what the agency could do. It was the foundation for a system of secret prisons where CIA officers and contractors used techniques that include torture. The CIA had participated in the torture of captured enemy non-combatants, civilians before, beginning in 1967, under the Phoenix program in Vietnam. Former DARPA Defense Advanced Research Program scientist in Dr. Robert Duncan's project Soulcatcher, Secrets of Cyber and Cybernetic Warfare. We have been trying to concentrate evil as humans understand it to create weaponry that attacks the information systems of the body and brain. I didn't know what we were doing fully at the time I served. I regret what I did. Richard Lighthouse, ex-NASA engineer, TI Advisory Board. Yeah, like I said, some people are controlled opposition, guys, so, use your discernment. Use your discernment. We have a great deal of evidence that suggests that the CIA's domestic headquarters in Denver runs the entire targeted individual gangstalking program and provides the funding for it. On the gangstalking side, they provide the funding through the black budget that feeds into the Director of National Intelligence, and that money and funding and programs make their way to the Terrorist Screening Center at the FBI and to the Department of Homeland Security, where the gangstalking operations are run. They also provide the billions of dollars that go into the sophisticated satellite systems that are operated out of Schriever Air Force Base. This is primarily a CIA-run program. On the political side, the Council on Foreign Relations, their goal, unfortunately, is to get control of the United States and its population. It is closely related to the forming of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the founding of the United Nations in 1945. Okay, in a report presented in 2012 to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Aspen Institute of Homeland Security Group advises we move away from a defensive position of protecting the country from foreign terror threats. Instead, we should focus on becoming a domestic security architecture concentrating on offensive measures on single adversaries. The object of war is to subdue the hostile will of the enemy, make him comply with our will, i.e., to force or encourage him/it to make the choices we want him to make. We believe will is brain-centered, therefore we must enter the brain. Neocortical warfare strives to control or shape the behavior of enemy organisms without destroying the organism. It does this by influencing, even to the point of regulating, the consciousness, perceptions, and will of the adversary's leadership, which is the neocortical system, brain. NW, neocortical warfare, seeks to penetrate adversaries' recurring and simultaneous cycles of observation, orientation, decision, and action. Irregular/civilian and special forces could execute both violent and non-violent operations. Our non-lethal and lethal forces will understand that the enemy target is the customer, and the enemy's segmented society is the workplace of neocortical warfare. Since advisories may abound, global reach will be an important requirement in the world that is emerging. Now, this is from Dr. James Giordano, a professor of neuroscience at Georgetown University in DARPA, the U.S. Army, the EU Human Brain Project consultant. I refer to myself as a neuro-weaponologist. Neuroscience captures $175 billion annual market space. The brain is the next battle space. We are targeting the brain. Like any race, The morbidity and mortality going at this speed is real. We are tracking neurological or brain signatures of key targeted individuals that are thought to represent whole groups. If I understand how his or her brain works and do this on a broad enough scale, I can develop patterns and I can use this in ways that informs my intelligence. This force multiplies and synergizes my human intelligence, my signals intelligence, and my communications intelligence. Coupled with assessment and access gives me these capabilities. Regarding the weaponization of neuroscience, that level of deep surveillance examines the idea of what type of surveillance and its informational transfer and ultimately actionability would obtain and entail. One of the things that we argued for very strongly is that the very least of what is necessary is a cooperative, collaborative, whole of government approach. But although that is necessary, we argued that that is not sufficient. What is really required in that type of deep surveillance that carries it through for the acquisition of information all the way to actionable entities that would then target certain things to be able to then mitigate our strategic competitors and our adversaries' efforts in this area would require more a whole of nation approach, where now we have almost a seamless triangulation between government entities, research entities, and commercial entities that are then able to mobilize those resources in the deep surveillance that is necessary for acknowledging, addressing, and assessing relative risks that may become threats, qualifying the risk to threat index, and then identifying what aspects of those questionable risks are mitigated. There are two parts of neurotechnology. The first is the soft or non-lethal dimension. This creates dysfunctionality and cognitive impairment, inability to make good decisions, dizziness, health effects. This is a weapon system to create cognitive impairment of individuals. The second is the hard dimension, which refers to killing people. The issue of non-lethality, as per non-lethal weapons, is associated with neurotechnology. The American officials attacking the embassies in Cuba and China, webmaster comment, referring to the so-called Havana Syndrome, were attacked to demonstrate a proof of concept. That is, to demonstrate an operational, deployed capability of soft, non-lethal neuroweapons that could and did take them out of the game. Soft neurotech, these non-lethal weapons, have many possibilities in hybrid conflicts, and these are now available. I came up with the concept of dark networks when I was advising Special Operations Command on this concept of bad guy hunting targeting. In global dark networks, which have evolved, you've got mixtures of terrorists and sovereigns, a variety of actors, rogue states, radicals, non-states, criminals. You've got to have banking, logistics. You need to have things to trade that are not monetary. You need to have cryptocurrencies, the ability to have monetary forms to support your operation. Rahul Manchanda, professor and international attorney. In 1994, Senator Joseph Biden wrote and then President Bill Clinton enacted the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, establishing the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services within the U.S. Department of Justice. Targets can be chosen for many reasons. Number 1, political views. Number 2, whistleblowing. Number 3, political dissidents. Number 4, asserting rights at work. Number 5, making the wrong enemy. Number 6, too outspoken. Number 7, investigating something that the state does not want investigated. Number 8, signing a petition. Number 9, writing a letter. Number 10, being called suspicious by a civilian spy/snitch. Or number 11, being a religious/ethnic racial minority. Western governments and the NATO military alliance are developing tactics of cognitive warfare using the supposed threats of China and Russia to justify waging a battle for your brain in the human domain to make everyone a weapon. The US-led NATO military cartel has tested novel modes of hybrid warfare against its self-declared adversaries, i.e., so-called targeted individuals, including economic warfare, cyber warfare, information warfare, and psychological warfare. Now, NATO is spinning out an entirely new kind of combat it has branded cognitive warfare. Described as the weaponization of brain sciences, the new method involves hacking the individual by exploiting the vulnerabilities of the human brain in order to implement more sophisticated social engineering. This document, Cognitive Warfare, shows that figures in the NATO military cartel increasingly see their own domestic population as a threat, fearing civilians to be potential Chinese or Russian sleeper cells, dastardly fifth columns that challenge the stability of the Western liberal democracies. NATO's development of novel forms of hybrid warfare come at a time when member states' military campaigns are targeting domestic populations at an unprecedented level. Francois de Cluzel defined cognitive warfare as the art of using technologies to alter the cognition of human targets. Those technologies, he noted, incorporate the fields of NBIC, nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science. Altogether, it makes a kind of very dangerous cocktail that can further manipulate the brain, he said. The nature of warfare has changed, the report emphasized. The majority of current conflicts remain below the threshold of the traditionally accepted definition of warfare. But new forms of warfare have emerged, such as cognitive warfare, while the human mind is now being considered as a new domain of war. For NATO, research in cognitive warfare is not just defensive, it is very much offensive as well. Developing capabilities to harm the cognitive abilities of opponents will be necessary. In other words, NATO will need to get the ability to safeguard her decision-making process and disrupt the adversary's one. As anyone could be a target of these cognitive warfare operations, any use of modern information technologies is a potential target. It targets the whole of a nation's human capital, the report ominously added. The potential execution of a cognitive war to complement to a military conflict, it can also be conducted alone, without any link to an engagement of the armed forces. Moreover, cognitive warfare is potentially endless, since there can be no peace treaty or surrender for this type of conflict. This weaponization of neuroscience/technology can and will be fatal. The NATO-sponsored study was clear to point out the research can be utilized to mitigate aggression and foster cognitions and emotions of affiliation or passivity, induce morbidity, disability, or suffering, and neutralize potential opponents or incur mortality. In other words, to maim and kill people. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video. Until next time, peace out.